This is nice.
It's nice.
It's open, bright.
Well, welcome to everybody, and I have to share with you a particular moment of emotion that we have in this institution. This is the first time ever that we are using this atrium in this format, because a massive work, not particularly lifted by technology, I'm afraid to say, it was very much about brick and mortar and construction work, has been done here in the last 3 years, and this is the first time that we are using it in that format. So we are all very pleased, and well done for those who worked so hard. So, for those of you who know well the IMF, you might be a little bit surprised by the topic that we are addressing this morning. We're not going to talk very much about fiscal. We're not going to talk very much about the macroeconomic framework. We're not going to talk about debt sustainability analysis. Shock horror for some. Well, we believe that the topic is relevant because the much talked about technology revolution is already here and it is underway. It is changing our social lives. It is changing our work. It is changing our political system. It is changing the way we pay for goods and services, the way we get a ride. It is changing financial systems as well, central banking and the likes, and it is changing the IMF. And of course, we have this very personal relationship to technology. All of you in this room, I am sure, are deeply attached to at least one particular device. If I asked you to drop your cell phones now, it could be another shock horror. I have to tell you a story on that front. One of my sons has a dog. He never liked walking the dog. Never, ever. So it was the girlfriend. But for the last 6 months, every time I called him after 6 o'clock, he lives in Paris, he's on a walk. I said, what's the matter with you? Oh, I'm on my poke tour. Changes people's life in a very intimate way. But this is for fun. Cell phones and other devices that you are all playing with or writing on or learning from are also serious business tools, particularly in countries where access on the internet is limited. Now, thankfully, over 80% people in developing countries now have access to mobile phones, but there is still a huge technology divide. 6 billion people have no access to broadband or fast internet access. I'm actually told that there are places, including in this neighborhood, not very far from here, where you have to wait for a long time until you can actually download effectively a heavy document. Yes. But of course, the technology revolution doesn't stop with consumer devices. Whether we're talking big data, the Internet of Things, digitization, automatization of production processes, 3D printing, the technological revolution is reaching deep into every sector of our economies, and particularly when they are used in combination. And this will have profound implications on the way we live, on the way we learn, on the way we earn, and on the way we consume. Something that technological innovation makes workers more efficient and productive, raising demand and income. Others argue that automation and technology is throwing less skilled workers out of their jobs, widening gaps in employment and income, with machine more and more capable of taking their job. The risk is that income and employment gaps will continue to grow. We at the IMF, we need to understand those changes and be part of the discussion. We will be asked for advice by many of the finance ministers, leaders of countries around the world, who have to take decisions that will be effective in the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years' time. And we need to understand, thanks to those who are in the technology world, what the impact will be. We have done some work already in that direction. For instance, we are studying the impact of advances in technology on finance, on government, and the global economy more generally, including on labor markets and inequality. That is work which is underway at the moment, which should be released in a couple of months. The issue of inclusive growth is very important to us. We've been able to demonstrate that growth will only be sustainable and inclusive provided that rising inequalities are actually addressed and reduced. And this is particularly true for low-income and developing countries. But we are, reasonably good at macroeconomic, but we're certainly not experts in technology, although there are some experts in technology in this institution. So that is why we want to hear from the innovators and experts directly. And there are quite a few questions that I'm going to ask them in turn, and then hopefully a dialogue will be established between them and certainly with your input as well. So we have a highly respected panel with very esteemed panel members. First of all, to my left, John Chambers, and I apologize to each of them and to all of you. The description of each and every one of them is going to be unbelievably sketchy, because when you look at their resume and their achievements, we could be here until the end of the day, just going through what they've done.
So corporate overhead at Cisco.
Early Silicon Valley innovator, the executive chairman of Cisco. John is one of Time magazine's 100's most influential people and has been for many years. He's also good friends. We go back a long way. We've tried a few initiatives together, and I'm very pleased that you could be with us today, John. Hilda Mora, the founder and CEO of Visa. Sorry, they got all this wrong. Hilda is there, yes, and Leila is here. So Hilda Mora, founder of CEO of Weza Tele, a leading technology startup in Kenya and mentor and champion to young tech entrepreneur. My recollection, Hilda, is that there are more than 100 startups that you have actually godmothered and helped and supported over the course of the last few years. You will tell us about that. Ray Kurzweil needs no introduction. He's one of the world's leading inventors, authors, and futurists. Ray has been described as the ultimate thinking machine and the rightful heir to Thomas Edison, no less. Now to you, Leila. Leila Jana, founder and CEO of Sama, a non-profit social business that gives digital work to impoverished people around the world. Leila is an inspiration for social entrepreneurs using technology to solve the world's most pressing problems. My recollection is you have quite a few training centers in many countries around the world in order to support them and give them access to technology in order to encourage their initiatives, whether it's profit or non-profit. So with that, and before turning over to our panelists, we're going to watch a very short introductory video behind us. So, are we ready? Ray, I'm going to turn to you first and ask you, where do you think technology will take us in the next 5 to 10 years? I know I'm abusing of your sagacity and forward thinking, but if not you, then who else? How will it affect our lives? How will it affect the way we work, relate to each other, and so on and so forth?
Well, let me start with a broad perspective. You saw the Bill Gates quotes about how it's improving productivity, but then people are always challenging, how come we don't see the productivity gains in the productivity statistics? Well, the answer is we put the gains in the numerator and the denominator. When I spent $300 for this, that counted as $300 of economic activity, despite the fact that it's billions of dollars of computation and communication circa 1970, millions of dollars of information services. I saved up as a teenager thousands of dollars to buy an encyclopedia. That's one of thousands of free services. Now, as I go around the world, people actually think that things are getting worse. What's actually happening is our information about what's wrong in the world is getting exponentially better. I'll just cite a few statistics, because people are really unaware of this. And I'll cite a statistic about how people are unaware of it. Poverty in 1820, 94% worldwide. Today, it's 9.6%, reduction of 90%. And that doesn't count the massive purchasing power gains that I just cited. Average income in the United States, $1,804.50 a day. In today's dollars, today it's $147. It's a 30-fold increase in constant dollars. Literacy worldwide, 12% in 1820, 85% today. So a 2016 survey of 26,000 people in 24 countries, only 13% knew that poverty had decreased at all in the last 20 years. Only 1% correctly answered that it had decreased by over 50%. Now, if I were oppression futurist to 1900, I'd say, okay, 38% of you work in factories, 25% in factories, 38% on farms. That's 63% in factories and farms. Today, that's 2% on farms, 8.7% in factories, a total of 10.5%. That's a reduction of sixfold. But so people say, oh my God, I'm going to be out of work. I say, well, don't worry, you'll get jobs developing apps for mobile devices, websites, doing data analytics. Nobody would have any idea what I'm talking about. People say, so okay, we're destroying jobs at the bottom of the skill ladder, we're adding jobs at the top of the skill ladder, but are we actually adding as many jobs as we're destroying? Well, in 1900 we had 24 million jobs, today we have 142 million jobs. Okay, but the population has increased. Well, we've gone from 31% of the population to 44% of the population. Okay, but how do those new jobs compare to the ones we've destroyed? $1,900 per capita income in today's dollars, $6,000. Today it's $56,000. So that's a ninefold gain in constant dollars. Hours worked in 1900 was 3,000 per year. Now it's 1,800. That's a reduction of 40%. So we're actually earning 11 times as much in constant dollars per hour. We had 63,000 college students in 1870. We have 20 million today. We're spending 16 times as much in constant dollars per student in K through 12. And the last point I'll make is that this is the most peaceful time in human history. People say, what are you kidding? Don't you pay attention to the news? There was just an incident last week, the week before that. Well, we rightfully get upset about incidents and wars that kill dozens, hundreds, thousands of people. I mean, just go back to World War II, 50 million people were killed, and that was the most peaceful century in human history up to that time. Your chance of being killed was dozens, and by some measures, hundreds of times greater centuries ago. Democratization, you could count the number of democracies a century ago on the fingers of one hand. You could count the number of democracies 2 centuries ago on the fingers of one finger. So we're making tremendous progress, but people are completely unaware of that.
All right, Ray, you've taken us back into history, comparing where we were, what gains have been realized over the course of time. You haven't even mentioned longevity, which is certainly also a number.
We'll get to those things.
Most of your numbers were US numbers, right? US economy.
Well, I had some poverty was worldwide.
Was global, yeah. But the 50,000 per capita is more likely to be US than Kenya, yeah. Now, John, take us into the future. Impact of technology. What do you foresee in the next 5 to 10 years? How will our lives, the way in which we work, the way in which we relate to each other, how will that be disrupted, transformed, enhanced, damaged? Tell us.
If you look at what is in front of us, and I want to say at the very beginning, I'm a tremendous optimist on what technology will do over the next 1 to 2 decades. I think it will transform every person's life, not just in this room, but every person's life in the world. With the internet era, it affected just a percentage of people, and Christine, as you said, even here in Washington, D.C., even get connectivity can be a challenge. A digital world that we're now about to encompass will transform every country, and there will be no entitlement. It'll be a period of you disrupt or you get disrupted. Economically, for the people in the room, my view is that over the next decade, you're talking about incrementally $19 trillion in economic incremental growth. That's 1 to 3% on every GDP in the world for the next decade, if countries move on it. When you really think about GDP growth, 1 to 3% incrementally, it also has the chance to be very inclusive in terms of jobs and very inclusive in terms of countries as you move around the world. And I think you will also see the average medium income, whether you're in Africa, Asia, North America, or Europe, increase dramatically if we do this right. It's a simple principle behind it. It isn't technology in and of itself. It is as you move from connecting 1,000 devices connected to the internet to 15 billion today to 500 billion in 15 years, combine that with cloud, combine it with social media, combine it with the capability of big data analytics, it will transform every business model we see. It will transform healthcare and education. As this occurs, however, there'll be tremendous disruption. 40% of the companies in America, Asia, Europe will disappear in the next decade. However, startups,
how many did you
40%,
say? 40%.
And it'll probably be a higher number. And we first said this about 3 years ago. A lot of people said, John, you've been accurate on your projections, but you're going to miss it. Now you talk to the people at Ford or GM or at Walmart or at any of the banks around the world, they know that it's probably going to be even a higher number. So what you saw with an Uber, a Lyft, an Airbnb, an Amazon, the effect it had on retail, automotive, et cetera, will go through each industry. As you look at this, however, it has a chance of being tremendously inclusive. And before any of you say, John, your commitments are too optimistic, and merely connecting devices won't have that type of impact, watch what happened in the first internet era. I was honored, and I'm dating myself, Christine, that I was on the White House press group with President Clinton and Vice President Gore in the mid-90s when he talked about an information era. And he talked about it exactly like we are today in terms of here is the GDP opportunity for our country, here's the job creation, here are the opportunities and how it could change things. Many people did not believe, and many people thought there'd be more destruction than benefit. Fast forward during 8 years of administration, and by the way, I'm a Republican, so a critic would be the right choice of words here. He did amazing. 22.5 million jobs, 4% average growth in GDP. Mean family income, American households went up 14%. Median went up 22%. Last time America got a raise was that time period. So what you're about to see is this change occur, except 3 to 5 times the impact. And if you look at countries around the world, every country except the US has a digitization plan. And when you go to these countries, and let me talk about 2 of them, let's talk about France.
Did you say every country in the world except the US?
Except the US has a major digitization plan owned by their leader, Netanyahu, if you will, in Israel, Renzi in Italy, Merkel in Germany, Hollande in France, Modi in India, etc. And so you see them suddenly saying, I'm going to embrace this. And they are looking at their GDPs to grow 1 to 3% incrementally. In the case of India, instead of growing at 5 or 6%, he's growing at 7.5%. He thinks he can grow to 8 to 9%, which I agree with. He thinks he can do it for 1.3 billion people. He thinks he can do it with 100 smart cities at once. He views they can become a digital manufacturing powerhouse, a startup country, if you will, and do it with nominal effect on the environment as you drive through it. And to employ over 1 million new jobs per month is what's required to feed that economy. If you're going to bet on one nation emerging-wise in the world, I'd bet on India and double down. Your country of France. You and I have talked about this for many years. France, very innovative, but not the place you'd locate a business or a startup. Something changed 2 years ago. The country suddenly had the most startups at the Consumer Electronics Show of any other country in the world except the US. The business leaders suddenly turned optimistic. Government, a socialistic government group, and the business leaders started talking about 1 million new jobs being created in the next 3 to 4 years. They said, what does it take to become a startup country? And you saw Hollande with Valls, the prime minister, Macron, the economic minister, La Durant, the defense minister, the mayors of Paris and Nice come together with a common vision to say, how do we make this transition happen? Now, in this room, how many of you would say that 2 years ago, France could become the startup nation in Europe? Quick show of hands. One very biased opinion, and another person from France. The first 6 months of this year, what was the #1 country in Europe in terms of venture capital investments in startups? France. The point that I'm making, this transforms every country. And there is no entitlement. Just because the US led before doesn't mean we will now. Same thing with companies. When you talk to Mary at GM or Mark at Ford, they know it's a race in the automotive industry for them to become digital quicker than a Google, an Apple, a Tesla, a Next EV becomes manufacturing capable. And that the profits will be based upon gathering that data together. So I think the opportunities here are almost unlimited. I think the internet era went from literally 1900 to 2010. You're going to talk now about a digital era, which will go from 2010 to 2030, has the chance to transform businesses and the average income of people in the world like never before. But if we don't do it right with government and business working together, we'll leave a lot of people behind.
And we'll come back to how we do it right and how we deal with those that are not necessarily on that page and who are not equipped. Now, Hilda, how did you use technology? Because you've done miracles in Kenya, and not just for yourself and your company, but for others. So what has been the role of technology in pushing your business through and being the success that it is? Tell us.
Thank you. So currently I'm working with a company called Pesa where I'm a leader in building the company in Kenya and across Africa. So Pesa is a Swahili word that means our money. And what it does, it's a micro lending peer-to-peer marketplace built for Africa. And what we're doing in Pesa is we are revolutionizing the way social lending practices are currently happening. We're not changing anything. We're not reinventing the wheel. Social lending is already happening in Kenya. It's already happening across Africa, where we have 70% of people currently just lending to each other. So what we are doing is we are digitizing, we are mobilizing, and we are bringing transparency and scalability in that lending actual of things. And the way we've done it in Pesa we've basically brought in the excluded mass market into that whole equation and changing the way people are transacting, the way they're investing, and the way they're actually growing their business. The impact we are creating is basically including the 200 billion individuals and the 200 million small and medium businesses, according to a recent study done by McKinsey of the excluded population, and bringing them into the whole equation of financial services and empowering them to be able to invest, scale, and grow their businesses. And this reminds me of a story of Jane Atieno in Kenya, who has a small business in the Kibera slums, and she's one of our customers who is now in her 6th loan of reborrowing and growing her small business, which has now become a very big restaurant, and she's able to provide for her children. She's able to see, her living standards improve, and that is the impact we are creating, helping the likes of Jane Atieno to grow their business and be able to move from just, where they were stagnated because of lack of that financial service and accessibility, to now growing and impacting her community and also growing herself and being able to pay school fees for her children. And so for us as Pesa and the way, I have been involved in building this marketplace and including the people who haven't been part of this financial inclusion is we are changing that whole aspect of digital finance and bringing that whole community into being part of this and of course looking at financial inclusion in the bigger aspect of scheme and changing Africa in general.
So precisely, what is the technology platform that has actually engineered that significant change and bringing those that were outside the market into the market?
Yeah, so the game changer has been mobile technology, and if we look at M-Pesa, which is pretty much the leading mobile payments in Kenya and also across Africa, has been, the core and the central of this growth of digital finance in enabling payments to happen, in bringing this success and using the disposal of what's available at these communities, which is a mobile phone, to allow, Jane and the rest of the people in her community to be able to access finance, which was impossible in the past.
Did that cut out the middleman in any way?
It does. And of course, we're going to see that, continuing to happen in the coming future, and also just having this success and transparency in a way that brings the consumer closer, and of course, getting the middleman out of the way to ensure that we're building this relationship in a more sustainable way.
Protect women from violence?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, Leila. What did you use? What was the role of technology in your success, and how has that changed eventually the way you work with people?
Sure. Well, I have to share an anecdote because I got started in this field 10 years ago working next door at the World Bank in a very dusty corner of the Development Research Group. and
we're not all dusty.
No. Well, now we're in the light in the IMF. So 2 years after that, I was working for a management consulting firm in India. I was assigned to a big outsourcing company to help take them public. And I was quite depressed. I had gone from international development into the corporate sector, and so I was looking for ways to tie the two together. And I read Tom Friedman's book, The World is Flat, and I thought, what if we could use technology really to reach into the poorest communities in the world and not just provide access to services, but actually provide revenue-generating jobs that could move people out of poverty? I read about Mohammed Yunus's work with Grameen Bank, and I thought if you could take that same model, the way that microfinance transformed the banking industry and made it accessible to the poor, could we do that with the global outsourcing sector? And so in 2008, I created an organization called SamaSource, which connects very low-income people, people who come exclusively from slums and rural areas and make around $2.20 a day in starting income. We recruit them to work for big technology firms at local computer centers around the world through a model that we call microwork. So we divide big technology projects into small units of work that can be done with relatively little training to start in fields like machine learning. We currently have 500 people as we speak tagging images for self-driving car technology. In places like Nairobi in Kenya, where we have a center of 500 people, northern Uganda, we have a center in Gulu, we're the largest employer there, and it's a technology company, and in India, sorry. And as of this year, we have moved 35,000 people, about 8,000 workers, and their families from $2 a day to well over $8 a day. So we see a substantial improvement in the quality of their housing, their food. Obviously, there's a massive investment at the community level. And what's exciting to me is that this flips on its head the traditional idea of how we should develop some of these societies through increasing foreign direct investment and possibly getting more activity happening, you know, at the elite level in these societies. We're reaching into places where people would normally never have a job. We've piloted this model now across East Africa, South Asia. We're working in refugee camps, so with Syrian refugees in Lebanon now, and we've also made this model work here in the United States in rural communities. So I'm very optimistic, although despite what Ray said earlier, I think, you know, while we're seeing these massive gains for many people, we're also seeing at the very bottom a stagnation, which has led to massive, you know, unrest. We saw it with the Arab Spring. We see it here in this current election cycle. And I think if we don't do our job really understanding what those people are facing in terms of the challenge in not just accessing technology services, but actually making real income and making a living in the new economy, I think we'll unfortunately pave a disastrous path if we ignore them.
Right. So the model that you've successfully put in place and which is so beneficial, again, what technology platform was a triggering point? Was it cell phones like for Hilda, or was it shared information? Was it access to clouds? What was it exactly that helped?
So I distinctly remember, and we have photos of this on our website, these giant red spools of fiber optic cable rolling out, literally rolling out, spools of cable rolling out across East Africa. And so for us, the big transformation happened in 2008. Kenya didn't have fiber optic capacity. The World Bank was funding local entrepreneurs to get cheaper satellite access because it was impossible to build a technology business back then. It was so expensive. And a couple of years later, these massive undersea cables reached East Africa, and it had a dramatic transformation. Instantly, people in Gulu in northern Uganda had better internet connections than people, unfortunately, in rural Arkansas, where we still have connectivity issues today in 2016 in our programs there. So I think that the most powerful force in many of these economies for transformation is high-speed, low-cost internet access. We ended up building our own platform. If you're all familiar with Amazon's Mechanical Turk platform, think of it as the .org version of that. It's a platform that allows us to unitize these big tasks and send them discreetly to workers. So a worker in Nairobi who comes from a slum like Mathare or Kibera will come into our center, not far from where he or she lives, and walk in and see a screen with an image and then be tasked with tagging that image in specific ways. So we've broken down this work into bite-sized chunks that make it more accessible for low-income people.
Fantastic. I'm going to actually join you two contributions together, because you did refer to creation of multiple jobs, this new wave that we are beginning to experiment, but which we don't really perceive the end of. How do you prepare people for that? Those who were working on the assembly lines for the likes of Ford, General Motors, and all of those, plus the people that you are reaching now, how do you prepare them? Do you make the task as simple and small as possible, as you seem to describe? Or for those who are in their late 40s, let alone their 60s, how do you help them?
I think
You
this
too.
is the bigger challenge that we face. We could actually finish each other's sentences even though we didn't practice it. What you need for this transformation is access to broadband at an affordable rate. That's probably $2.50 per month per household, 10 to 15 megs. That's what they're going to do in India. As you do that, connectivity is your access, and it will be a smartphone is the device you're going to use. As that occurs, you've got to change education, and you've got to change literally the whole process behind it. Best case example, Andhra Pradesh, Chief Minister Naidu there, 50 million people, rolled out the network literally in less than 1 year, and he believes he can grow his economy, and I will bet on him at 12 to 15% per year, raise the average income of every one of the 50 million people in his state dramatically. He also knows, Christine, where you're leading us both, if he doesn't change education at the same time he provides access, if he doesn't change the skills to where we capture, especially our diverse group and our gender group literally in the US, in junior high, and educate on technology, then they will get left behind and the digital divide becomes much broader. But when you saw them bring this to a home in India, to a government official, to a school, to a hospital, you suddenly understood what digitization was all about. But if we don't change the education system quickly, this digital divide will become much wider. Pretty close to what you're thinking.
Absolutely, and I want to share something that we developed here in the United States to connect low-income workers with gig economy platforms like TaskRabbit, Handy, Care.com, which is now the largest platform for care workers like babysitters and housekeepers. And so a lot of this work that was previously in the informal sector and under the table is now starting to move into the gig economy, which can be actually really good for workers because for the first time they have flexibility and they have transparency in wages. However,
Yes.
there are no government programs that we've seen. We're the first nonprofit, which is kind of astounding to me, to launch any sort of training program to prepare workers for the gig economy. Even though 40% of for the gig economy,
Yeah.
for the contingent labor economy, right? 40% of the workers now in the United States are in the contingent labor force. We're not even measuring that accurately. We have no idea, how much money they're making, and well, now we're getting better insight into that. But we have no idea how many people are really being affected by this. And my fear is that government is moving 10 years behind where it should be. And so low-income people are the ones that hurt the most in this. They're the ones who have no idea how to grasp these new technologies, partly because they've only recently had access to good high-speed internet. Just one other anecdote, we work in East Palo Alto,
Yes.
1 mile from the Facebook headquarters. And last year, our incoming class of students, only 25% of them had access at home or on a smartphone to the internet. Wow. Only 25% in East Palo Alto.
But if you give those people in East Palo Alto or in Afghanistan or in India access to the internet, you give them a chance to get training like a Cisco Network Academy where we train 2 million students a year. They get jobs and they get it at a substantial higher rate. This is where governments, business, perhaps the IMF, needs to come together with futuristic thinkers and pick perhaps a pilot country and say, here's what could really be done and be the model for others.
I just want to mention, because you did refer to $2.50
$2.50 per month
access fee per month, right?
for 10 to 15 megs.
I think there is a country, Sri Lanka, Shamini, correct me if I get that wrong, which is actually giving free access on
Even
buses, town squares, any public places. So people who want to have it at home have to pay for it, but those who want to access in public space will have it for free, which is also an interesting development and a different sort of allocation of shares and burden between private and public. Now,
Well,
what I take from the fantastic exchange between these two is that if a government has the choice between investing on a major new railroad, however fast speed it is, and broadband that will be accessible to all, they should definitely choose the latter. What do you think?
well, yeah, I mean, railroads is the 19th century technology. That was our internet of the 19th century. Let me broaden the discussion again. I talked about the past, but let me talk about the future. I mean, we have 2 billion people connected today. It's clearly going to be 4, 5, 6 billion over the next 3, 4, 5 years. It's important how we get there, but one of the principles I like to talk about, which I call the law of accelerating returns, is that the price, performance, and capacity of information technology doubles every year. That goes back to the 1890 census. And it goes through thick and thin, through war and peace, through boom times and recessions. It went through the Great Depression. It went through the recent 2008 recession. It's basically a doubling of price performance per year. That's a multiplication of 1,000 in capability over a decade. And people say, well, that's great. You know, we got these really cool devices. You can access all these information surfaces, but you can't eat information technology. You can't wear it. You can't live in it. That's going to change also. All of these industries are going to be transformed by information technology. 3D printing will print out clothing in the 2020s. There'll be lots of cool open source designs you can download for free and print out for pennies per pound. There's a vertical agriculture revolution coming where we'll grow food, hydroponic plants for fruits and vegetables, in vitro cloning of meat in AI-controlled buildings at very low cost. Already in Asia, a building was put together, 3-story office building was put together in days, snapping together modules that could be printed out on a 3D printer, like Lego bricks. That's going to be the nature of construction as we go through the 2020s. It's going to revolutionize manufacturing. So we're going to transform every aspect of life. And another major phenomena, which you alluded to briefly, is that we're going to transform health and medicine. That didn't used to be in information technology. And I'm not just talking about computerizing medical records. I'm talking about the very basis of biology being understood as software, and we now have the means of reprogramming it. The enabling factor of that was the Genome Project, which was a perfect exponential. And we're now seeing clinical applications. We can fix a broken heart, not yet from romance. That'll take a few more developments in virtual reality. But from a heart attack, we can actually reprogram adult stem cells and fix a damaged heart. We're actually growing organs, kidneys, lungs, and hearts, and installing them successfully in primates. It's coming to a human near you in the next 5 to 10 years. 10 years from now, health and medicine will be radically transformed as we reprogram health and biology away from disease and away from aging. And these are going to be very rapid phenomena. Exponentials start out slowly, doubling tiny numbers, and then they get to the knee of the curve. And we're in that knee of the curve now in many different areas.
So you believe that fiscal spending by governments is going to significantly decrease in the health and benefits sector because the right investments will have been made?
Well, there are short-term issues where, because of proprietary technologies, certain medicines are very expensive at first.
Do you think that will change, or that we should think about changing these proprietary issues in the way we did at the time of trying to eliminate and certainly fight AIDS in various countries, where eventually the second generation medicine
It will ultimately change. You get to the 2030s, we'll have medical nanorobots that can overcome disease, that'll extend our immune system. Right now, our immune system doesn't go against cancer. It thinks, oh, that's me, because it didn't select for long life. We'll have these methodologies that can overcome most disease and aging processes in the 2030s, and ultimately they'll be like vaccines. I mean, do you have to be wealthy to get a vaccine today? And that protects you against many things. We're going to broaden that substantially. So we're going to actually make major gains in longevity, over the next 10, 15 years.
Christine, if I could just jump in for 1 second.
Sure.
The technology that Ray's talking about and my colleagues are talking about will be the easy part. Where this will break down is companies or countries or healthcare groups will not change the organization structure,
Yes.
will not change the culture, the reward mechanism. They won't focus on speed of innovation. And I actually think Ray's numbers are conservative. I think you're going to see, when you have the processing capability and big data working together, it will be not Moore's Law every 18 months. It's going to be a much faster pace. But you've got to keep up with the organization change and the cultural change regardless of country.
Yeah, but we see that with a tremendous explosion of entrepreneurship. And I see that all around the world. I was in France and said, our neighborhood is the Silicon Valley of Paris. And in China, our neighborhood's the Silicon Valley of Beijing. It's become a metaphor for a whole different way of organizing innovation. And we need to transform education, which is, I think, broken. The idea of stuffing facts in the kids' minds is an obsolete strategy. We carry these facts around. Really learn by doing, I think, is a key strategy. And even young children in elementary school, junior high school, can take on world problems. They may succeed or they may fail, but they'll succeed at learning something.
If I can add just one thing.
Yeah, and then I ask Ilda
Sure.
something. Because
You very boldly referred to patent law. I mean, I'm amazed that you did that. Thank you. I think, frankly, there's a big part of this discussion that we could maybe have this in a separate panel, but technology is amoral, right? These forces are not, we have to guide these forces, right? All of this stuff will not lead to prosperity for everyone unless we choose to make it so. And it is very scary to me that we're not having some of these conversations. In a world of zero marginal cost software, where one person can create an innovation and own it, right? And require very few people to work for him or her to generate massive amounts of capital. That is a radical difference from the economy of the past, where if you wanted to amass lots of capital, you had to amass lots of workers because you needed lots of people to make stuff.
Yeah.
And now when making stuff is essentially free in this new zero marginal cost world, we have to revise our laws. We have to think about things like a basic income for the people who will inevitably be left behind. And I think a lot of that is going to fall on the heads of policymakers. And we have to remember that we shape technology, it doesn't shape us.
Yeah, but let's face it, there will be lots of vested interest, because the moment you start talking about revising those particular patent laws, intellectual property law, copyrights law, and so on and so forth, you will be bumping into those who have been living with the 50 years past death, or the 7 years, or the 20 years, depending on what device or what framework you're talking about.
Yeah.
And these people are not going to like it. But there is a huge discrepancy, I couldn't agree more with you, between the sort of time to entry and the time for protection. And there has to be a debate between private and public sectors on that. Hilda, I want to come to you, and I wanted to jump from Ray's point about how agriculture is going to be significantly changed, how the manufacturing activities that we have is going to be completely shortcut, streamlined, and reduced to a much, much smaller contribution to the added value. How do you foresee that? How do you imagine? I still have in my mind walking through the flower plantations of Kenya, for instance, and I was wondering, what will be the impact of what we foresee in the next few years?
Yeah, so I mean, technology, for Africa and for emerging markets, I guess the big change maker is going to be the penetration of mobile technology that we continue to see. Right now, it's at 80% plus, and we continue to see that grow because of also the digital finance, taking shape. And it's impacting in agriculture. We're seeing that changing the lives of farmers through the startups that are coming up, and changing the whole way of the way farmers can now be able to access credit. And financial institutions like the banks, they don't have data of how to credit score farmers. But we're seeing small startups coming up, collecting this data and building credit score for farmers to be able to now access finance and also be included as part of that financial services in inclusion. Again, we are seeing that growing in terms of the payment, national payment, even for government. They're able now to basically reduce the leakages in expenditure and at the same time improve service delivery. And it goes across sectors, from manufacturing to, agriculture to finance and everything else that we need to do, payments, and we need to bring that transparency on the board. Again, the impact is going to be only important, I think, if we as emerging markets think about education and how we're going to change that and improve quality for both men and women. And right now, we're all looking at education as a silver bullet, but I still believe, that is going to be influenced by policy playing a very big role in not only just changing the way we look at education in a classroom setup, but then looking at a multi-dimensional way of a community base, the cultures involved in Africa, to then go beyond that and say, how can we bring these networks on the table to then bring that critical thinking, and then to also look at education from an ICT perspective. In Kenya, for example.
Help me with that, because education, we all think of online education, access by many, availability of so much more than ever before, and so on. What role will policies play in your line of thinking?
Yeah, so policy will not only just bring new thinking and perspective to this, but also will bring, the short-term and the medium and also the long-term solution. And the way I look at education is really a very complex, aspect in terms of the emerging markets. We still have to fix, infrastructure, for example. The government needs to fix, training and how they can bring capacity into that whole equation. Vocational training and apprenticeship. No one is really thinking about it in a big way in terms of the short-term solution, giving people technical skills. And in Kenya, for example, we have the Standard One laptop project, which is a $17 billion project that's currently going on. But again, what is the point of bringing these skills at an early stage if our infrastructure is not okay? Are these people going to be able, are these young students going to be able to leverage that and grow with that into the future? Again, policy is going to also help to, for example, bring the capacity for teachers and also for students to be able to see that grow into the future and again, pass it on to the future generations. So it's going to be not just infrastructure, not just capacity and the new approaches of thinking, but also investment into growing capacity and also to grow the infrastructure around impact of education.
Ray, you wanted to jump.
So this isn't the first time in human history we've automated jobs. This concern started in the textile industry in England in 1800 with the Luddite movement. We've been moving up Maslow's hierarchy, and we're redefining the nature of work. I mean, the idea of a job is really a means to an end. It's not an end to itself, and we're finding different ways of being productive. For example, in the United States, we have now 20 million college students and millions more who service them. So what are these 25 million people doing, which is 15% of the workforce? Well, they're studying poetry and art and science and music, which is now considered a useful thing to do. You've got new platforms where people are creating millions of apps and content for all of these new services, music, videos. These platforms didn't exist years ago. That's also considered useful work to do. A lot of this is actually not captured by the economic statistics. There are estimates that the informal economy has doubled from $1 to $2 trillion in the United States in the last 10 years. So we're redefining the nature of work. Work is actually becoming more gratifying. Go back a century ago, people were happy to get a backbreaking job to put family on their family's table. Today, people get a lot of their gratification and actualization from their work. I think we're going to redefine the nature of work. There's going to be plenty of material resources to go around for our biological population.
So Ray, do you think we need to measure better and we need to invent new tools, new instruments, new theories?
Well, I do think we're not capturing a lot of the income from these new platforms.
We are not.
We're not. It's actually much easier for people to operate outside the economic system because of encryption and all of the informal means with which people make money, which is not captured. So people have noticed employment as a percentage of population has risen up until about a decade ago, and now it's down 1.9%. But what's not captured is a tremendous amount of activity on these platforms that didn't exist 6-7 years ago.
That is going to raise tax definition issues as well, right?
Definitely.
Because there are transactions, and actually I think there is a German proposal that has been launched a couple of days ago to actually try to identify the value that is transacted when there is no actual exchange of money between the emitter and the receiver. Yeah. And we need to also think about that. John, you wanted to jump in.
Two thoughts. First is that when you think about what we're talking about as a group today, innovation is about speed, but it's also a replicatable process. I'll just use a small example. We've acquired 187 companies at Cisco. We have it down to a process of innovation. Probably 80% of them have exceeded our expectations. We can get a phone call on a Thursday night about a company we don't even know the name of or what they do, meet with the CEO the next morning, follow up that afternoon with them, have it through both board of directors, and announce for a $3 billion acquisition by Monday. That's the type of process you have to have in place really to do innovation that we're talking about, whether it's by country or by cities.
So how do you do the due diligence on that one?
We have a process already down that you said, here's what you go after, here's what the room has to occur in terms of the data room. We know how to drive it through. We know exactly what to do. But this is about innovation at a different speed. What will get us all into trouble is when we think about this the way we thought about it in the past linearly, we're going to get left behind. Why will this fail by company or by city or by country? They won't get the market transition right. They'll think linear rather than exponential. They won't think like a teenager. They will fail to break down their silos either in their organization or within their government. They won't reinvent the process and the compensation and organization behind it, and they get too far away from their customers. So I think as we do this, we've got to get a replicatable fashion behind, because 1,000 points of light don't make it here. You've got to say, how do you really change education at a much faster pace as an example for everyone?
Okay, I'll submit to you something. We've seen that it's going to affect agriculture, it's going to affect health massively. It's also affecting finance. I mean, you're a vivid example of that. I think yesterday or the day before, ING, which is a big bank from the Netherlands, announced that they were going to cut 1,000 jobs.
Yes.
But they're going to invest $800 million in technology, and they want to just move as digital as they can and as fast as they can to catch up with people like you. What do they do with the 1,000 people that are out of a job and probably unlikely from day one to day two to move to those new ways of doing business?
Gotcha. First, those numbers, unfortunately, are probably conservative compared to what's going to happen in the banking industry. Between artificial intelligence, big data, digitization, 30 to 50% of what each one of us do, including us on the stage, will be taken over by robotics and artificial intelligence.
That would be disappointing.
But it also means we must, for the first time, move much quicker on education now, and not in the old world fashion of linear thinking to prepare for where the jobs will be, both by companies and others.
It's not the first time in history we've done that. How many jobs circa 1900 still exist today? We've continually eliminated jobs through automation. We have a tremendous explosion in the entrepreneurial sector, for example. When I started, there was 10 million, in 1974, there was $10 million of high-tech venture capital in the United States. Today, that's a small deal. And you've got entrepreneurship all over the world. People are finding new ways to be productive. And the economic statistics show more and more people are economically engaged, and average incomes are going up. And as I pointed out, the value of a dollar is increasing. Certainly it does in information services. We can clearly see that. But that's going to affect all of these other sectors as well. So money will go further.
Please.
Sorry, just one note on this, because we have a lot of direct experience training these artificial intelligence algorithms. And one facet of work that hasn't really been fully explored is how many people will be needed to train computers to eventually replace people. It sounds really odd, but we're in the business of doing that. And we had an interesting conversation with the head of M, which is a program of Facebook Messenger, which reaches 1 billion people, so the largest messaging platform in the world. And M is their artificial intelligence chatbot. And they're employing thousands of people just to train the algorithm and to teach the computer how to have natural language processing happen more fluidly. Now, I don't think this is going to replace all of the 100% of the jobs that get lost because of this shift, but it is a really interesting new area of work. And per Ray's point, I think there are some pessimists out there. We're friends with some of them at MIT who've said that the nature of this transformation, of this technological shift, is fundamentally different from the technology shift we saw 100 years ago. I don't know if I buy that, because I think we're not counting a lot of the new types of work people are doing. And certainly when you look at the gig economy, our labor statistics are woefully inadequate to measure the amount of activity that's happening there.
You know, there is a big economic debate that is raging at the moment, where you have on the one hand the McAfees of this world, MIT, and Gordon on the other hand, and one is saying massive changes, breakthrough, constantly happening at the moment, not particularly well measured, but that is going to unleash massive value. On the other hand, Gordon is saying, well, since the electricity and the engine, combustion engine, we haven't invented much of anything. So I suppose you're in the first camp.
I am in the first camp. That said, well, I guess I'm in between. I think that there will be a few new opportunities that emerge. I don't think there will be enough opportunities that emerge to totally absorb all the people displaced by this shift. But I think for the first time we will have, because computers are doing so much more work than they used to do, we will have massive numbers of people who could sustain themselves without having to work. And that's a theoretically wonderful thing. We just have to rethink the way we distribute those gains. And I think that means we need to have serious conversations about things like basic income, which is now being tested in Europe. There are even some pilots going on in the United States. Y Combinator, which is a massive technology incubator in the Bay Area, is actually funding startups to work on this concept of basic income. So I think we have to examine how we're going to change the rules of society to fit this new model. Yeah. And I do agree with Ray that we're starting to see a world in which fewer of us will have to work to achieve the same level or greater economic output.
So where will the income come from?
I can't believe I'm saying this at the IMF, but I think we're going to need to seriously re-examine our tax law. And if you can create software that has zero marginal cost and become a billionaire instantly, I think we need to examine whether or not some of that money should be fueled back into society in the form of basic income.
So it's not just those who own the machines, it's those who actually invent.
Those who invent, and interestingly, some of the inventors are behind this. If you look at what Mark Zuckerberg and Dustin Moskovitz have done, they're founders of Facebook, they've committed to giving away a huge percentage of their income at a very early age because they kind of agree with this. They're just a little distrustful of government as the allocator. But I think there is a real strong interest in these new sorts of, I hate to say redistribution at the IMF, but I just said it.
You can. There's no bad word around here.
Yeah, and I want to challenge a little bit because I'm in agreement with most of what my colleagues have said. This is something that I think we've got to think about dramatic increased productivity. And we've got to think about dramatic increased number of startups. And we've got to think about redoing the education system and preparing people for the future. If all we do is redistribute wealth off of a linear thinking, we're going to have social unrest and we will get into real problems. It's also going to be one where there'll be global competition among cities and companies at a faster and faster pace. And what you saw a Uber, not due to taxis, but due to the automotive industry, will occur in every industry: finance, social entrepreneurism, etc. So I think we've got to get ahead of this one, and this is where we've got to get some really smart minds together, saying how do you increase the average per capita income of everyone? How do you think about how you change the education system, not over 2 decades, because if it's 2 decades, it's over. And how do we do this in a way the majority of the 7 to 8 billion people in the world really benefit? I think it's doable, but if we go about it the way we've done in the past, I think we get left behind.
Well, I think it's in the interest of everyone that everyone have purchasing power, or we won't have markets for people to excel at. We will be able to create the material resources for our whole population at very low cost. The kinds of fantastic gains we see where now billions of people can have these incredible information resources will also apply to creating buildings and food and clothing and other material things that we need. So we'll be able to provide for people's needs. We do have to ask basic questions. What do we want to do with our lives? Work can be gratifying and a source of self-actualization, but the idea of a job has partly been a means to an end to provide distribution of wealth, but we do want markets. We don't want high concentration of wealth, or we won't have markets to sell to.
I'll share one anecdote with you. I was with Aung San Suu Kyi a couple of weeks ago in New York at the General Assembly, and we had a really beautiful discussion with her as to where she's going to take her country forward, together with all the official members of the government. And we said, what is most critical? What do you need most? And she said, I'm not the one saying what we need. I ask my people, and I go around the country and I want to know what they want. And she said, in descending order, potable water. Second, jobs. So I just want to challenge you a little bit on that. And then she went on to describe that it's not so much the income from the jobs, because maybe that can be addressed through different ways of allocating various resources. She said it's the dignity that goes with the job. It's the respect that goes with the job. And I'm sure that Hilda would not disagree with Aung San Suu Kyi. How do we address that if what you say is right, which is that in 10 years' time, you will no longer be defined by your job, but by something else? And how different will it be from the advanced economies and the emerging and low-income countries?
Well, just to throw in a quick point, I mean, the advice I give to young people I'm mentoring is to find your passion. It's an old sort of advice, but that should be your job, something that gives you pleasure, and then you won't want to retire. I like to say I retired when I was 5 because I decided I wanted to be an inventor. That's what I had a passion for, and so that's what I've done. Doesn't feel like work to me. That should be the nature of work, something that does give you meaning and actualization.
Okay, so go with the passion, but be technology literate as much as you can and acquire education in different ways in order to transform the world. Hilda.
Yeah, I think when I look at the emerging markets, we can talk about all the opportunities that are coming from the innovation spaces. We currently have more than 200 innovation spaces across Africa, which are just growing young talent, nurturing them, and helping them to think about the future. But again, we don't have a support system that works, from government to private sector to, academia that comes in and basically helps to grow this talent from a young age. So we need to start thinking about what support system needs to be there in place and how can we strengthen it from policy, coming in and bringing in the right training and capacity, private sector bringing in expertise, ideas, academia bringing in research to help understand the needs of the young people and also the needs of the future. It's gonna be an ecosystem. It's not gonna be a one size fits all. It's gonna be everyone playing their role in this whole ecosystem and everyone wanting and willing to contribute. Again, when I think about young people especially, because, Africa is growing and, according to what has been predicted, by 2050, the population in the emerging markets is just gonna be young people. But again, with this growth, comes, of course, poverty reduction, and we have to start thinking of how can Africa leverage that growth and use the young people as a fuel to then build innovations that are going to create these jobs, train them, and give them the right support systems. But we are going to all have a role to play into that whole equation. And more importantly, we have to start thinking about, how can we include the young people to be part of this decision making, and at the same time, how can government and all the initiatives that are currently happening in Africa come together and collaborate? So career development is going to be a very important aspect, and I don't look at it as jobs, I look at it as careers, because the young people, we need to be, basically given the foundation of this is where you're going and this is what you need to do to get there. So a very good example is the Smart Africa initiative that has currently brought in 13 countries across Africa to be part of thinking about digital jobs. And when I think about digital jobs, I think of it as a sustainable way of solving this employment problem for the youth. And again, Smart Africa, what's doing, it's creating a platform for digital jobs across Africa for young people to come and, freelance and have access to these opportunities and make money out of that. But at the same time, think about adjusting their skills to be able to compete for the future and for Africa to be able to position itself for the global aspect of things, whereby, new technologies are going to be the basis of defining that competition.
That's what you do with your 100 startups, right?
Yes.
Fantastic.
Exactly.
Leila and John, if you had in front of you the leader of an African country, which is in the developing world, where GDP per capita is, let's say, less than $1,000 per day, and who for some reason can actually spend public money on anything like road, railroad, power generation, broadband, either satellite or balloons or cables, or education. Which 2 or 3 would you pick?
Are they not allowed to fund firms?
What did you
Are
say?
they not allowed to fund firms?
They
invest in
can
enterprises?
kickstart something
Sure.
and work on a public-private partnership.
Sure.
That would be you proposed?
Well, so I have to confess, it's been quite frustrating working with government agencies in East Africa, and not just their agencies, but our agencies. We were funded by the State Department, which I'm very grateful for, but just the rigmarole required to even report on that funding makes it impossible for an entrepreneur to really make that workable. So I've been quite shocked by the fact that there is so much investment in private sector companies, which I think do long-term have a macroeconomic impact, and eventually that wealth does trickle down to some of the poorest people some of the time. But what I've seen is this massive investment in essentially firms that are owned by elite members of those countries, and not investment in social enterprises which go out and hire people from the very bottom. And I just want to encourage this model of thinking, this idea of impact sourcing, of deliberately using sourcing and hiring practices to address poverty very directly and measurably in the here and now. And we talk a lot with those governments and we say, well, you're employing lots of civil servants. Can we work with you on a program to recruit people from the slums and rural areas where poverty is most severe, and where you can have a huge economic impact just by paying people in those regions a decent salary. So I would say I would encourage investment in two areas. Number one, infrastructure. Getting that fiber optic cable to Gulu has been life-changing for the 400 people we've employed, and probably for the many thousands of people who've benefited from that income being invested for the very first time in bakers and grocers and farmers and small shopkeepers in that economy who never saw that kind of cash before in their wildest imaginations.
Was that publicly funded infrastructure?
Yes, so we've raised money. We're a nonprofit. We're actually one of the few intentional nonprofits in Silicon Valley. So we're a 501c3, but we became profitable this year out of our earned revenue. So this public investment is now yielding profits because we have this enterprise model with big companies, and that is a model that could be replicated in every country in sub-Saharan Africa. And how amazing would it be if government actually funded social enterprises that measurably moved people out of poverty in the short term? And again, that relies on this kind of infrastructure as well. So it's a twin investment in infrastructure and then in firms that leverage that infrastructure for measurable outcomes on poverty.
All right. John?
I'm a believer.
You deal with a lot of state agencies as well.
Yes, I do.
You have
I'm
more
a believer
leverage
in.
than I do, though.
Sometimes. I think big and small companies working together are the future. But about 7 years ago, an interesting survey came out, and when it first came out, I missed it, and then I understood the implications. Of college students worldwide, if you gave a choice between access to the internet and having a car, 60% of them wanted access to the internet. I would have failed. I would have taken the car. Now, the point that I'm making is, given a choice, society wants access to the internet. This is where, if you were giving advice to governments in Africa, I would do exactly what Prime Minister Modi has done in India. You can include everyone. You can create a generation of startups. You have to change the education system. You have to get the women, in US terms, in junior high. You have to remove the roadblocks for small companies and medium companies. Large companies around the world will not grow headcount anymore. They're going to shrink. So you have to get that startup community going. eBay, the average company on eBay does business in 7 countries around the world. That is the future. So you pick 1 or 2 countries with a very progressive leader in Africa, with a startup community that's already going the right way, that's willing to change things like Modi did. You get perhaps the IMF to play a role in this. You get a number of NGOs and other groups to come together. And if you do it in 1 or 2 countries, it will force the others to change. Because this is where there's nothing like healthy competition and a middle class evolving that other countries will say, I have to do the same. I don't think it's real complex. I think it's a replicatable model.
Let me comment on education, because I think we need a revolution in education. As I mentioned earlier, the model is broken. 8 years ago, I co-founded Singularity University, which is this symbol here, with Peter Diamandis of the XPRIZE Foundation and Larry Page. And the idea, there were 2 ideas. One is to center on exponential thinking, this exponential growth that we talked about, but also learn by doing. And our recent class, we had 80 students from 40 countries, chosen from 3,000 applicants, and the students self-organize into teams of 3, 4, 5 students each and take on some world challenge that they decide on themselves. Clean water in Africa, cleaning up the environment. And set a goal of actually positively affecting 1 billion people within 10 years. And so many of these teams from years ago are well on their way to having a major impact. Whether they succeed or fail, they'll succeed at learning something. And just stuffing sort of information into kids' minds is obsolete. We now have the best teachers in the world online. Like, I meet people all the time who are now experts in deep learning, which they learn from the best professors for free online. We will very soon have K through graduate school in many languages, free online. We really need to teach children and adults how to turn this knowledge into solutions in world problems. If I think about what little I've learned in my life, it's not been from formal schooling. It's been from my own projects.
Including failing.
Exactly. Mostly failing, so yeah.
Well, we owe you the scanner bed, don't we? Among other things.
The flatbed scanner.
Yeah. I'm going to ask you to summarize in 2 minutes what advice you would give to the IMF in relation to technology, and what advice we should give to our membership. And I'll just preface that with, because you talked about the dusty office out there somewhere, I just want to warn you that we are actually embracing technology. We do provide online education. We have thousands of civil servants from around the world, particularly in developing countries and emerging market economies, that qualify in public finance management, debt sustainability analysis, and various other topics that we actually teach online, thanks to MOOC, and the ICD division, which is really focused on this. We are using crowdsourcing in order to launch new projects, and we will soon be opening in this new fantastic space the IMF Lab, where we will have 3 or 4 PhDs of the best categories mingling with non-PhDs of the best categories, as long as they're together, working on a project, and maybe failing, and maybe succeeding. So that's just to give you a little bit of background. So, piece of advice, you each have 2 minutes.
Do you want to go first?
Okay. I guess the first piece of advice would be to ensure that the policies that we're implementing have equity embedded into them. You know, one of the biggest crises right now in Silicon Valley is the lack of women's participation, both as startup founders, but much more crucially as venture capital partners. Women make up fewer than 8% of VC partners, which is atrocious. And if you think about the implications of that, what that means for the companies that get funded, and therefore the technology that gets built and the way it gets built, and even the way those companies advocate for technology policy changes, right? Because they obviously exercise a lot of leverage in how government forms policy. So if we embed equity as a core principle in the way we think about funding those firms and designing policy, I think we'll emerge with a better world. Secondly, we often think about the private sector, and I know the IMF's mandate is to really focus on how to build the private sector in economies around the world. I think that so often the public sector gets marginalized and the nonprofit sector gets marginalized. And we're seeing a big shift in the NGO community towards more earned revenue models, towards business models like Samasource, like many of the things that we've seen in microfinance, where there's now a really interesting blend between the traditional aims of profit maximizing business and the aims of nonprofit NGO work. We're seeing that with B corporations and this entirely new landscape of the in-between profit maximizing and nonprofit social impact that can happen. And so I encourage us to make more investment in that area, whether you call it social enterprise or business that has a social impact, because I think it's the most fruitful area for social change to occur.
And I guess this sort of new species doesn't fall into any category at the moment.
No, we struggle with how to define it. Even in the U.S., the way we regulate nonprofits is from 1920. So I think we have a lot of evolution to go there. But the IMF can lead the way, and partly by emphasizing investment in these new types of enterprises.
Thank you, John. Thank you, Leila.
I'm going to steal a thought from a very good friend who passed away last week, Shimon Peres. He is an individual that I think is one of the greatest thinkers of our time. And he always thought about inclusion and how you really make a difference. He believed that companies could have more influence over the economic well-being of citizens in the world than governments could. He also believed that groups who have traditionally not worked together needed to come together to achieve these goals. And I think as a group, we've got to think much more exponentially, using his words, think like a teenager, have no fear of what's possible, and bring together groups that normally would not work together, set audacious goals, and then make it come true. I would challenge the group, perhaps with the IMF taking a leadership role, to combine with several NGOs, several startups, several futuristic thinkers, and say, how can we do this very uniquely in a couple of countries, wherever they are in the world, bring in some other high-tech companies as well, and be the model for the others. So I think we've got to think like Shimon would challenge me today. Think like a teenager, think audaciously in the goals. Anything is possible, except don't undersell how quickly this transformation will occur. I think speed of innovation is what it's all about. The technology will be easy. It's the culture, the organization, and the linear thinking that we have to change.
Very close to what Alvarian from Google has actually included in our F&D, which is Finance and Development magazine that is being published this week by the IMF.
So, I mentioned some of the progress we've made. We're moving up Maslow's hierarchy, but there are still people at the bottom who don't have access to clean water, don't have access to the internet. In fact, most of the world still doesn't. I think it's the IMF's unique role actually is to look after those people and get them internet access, get them clean water, get them basic medical services. I think that still has to be a priority. I think we will end up in a good place 10 years from now, but those 10 years are important. Beyond that, I think we can merge, as I mentioned, entrepreneurship and education, and we can even bring that into elementary school.
I agree.
And teach children how to actually use all these knowledge resources once they get access to them to solve real problems and learn something along the way. And some of them will actually succeed in solving those problems.
Thank you, Ray. Hilda, your turn.
Yeah, my advice to IMF, and of course, I guess everyone who's here, is investing in the young people to be part of this bigger vision. And I believe we can sit here the whole day, talk about recommendations to policy and private sector and how everyone is going to be included. But if young people are not going to be at the center of it to drive this to the generations to come, then it's going to be impossible. So, IMF investing in young innovations and people especially, because the talent is going to be more important in building this talent in the local countries, is going to be very, very vital to then grow the vision that we have here today. And again, digital finance, I still believe, is going to be at the powering of these emerging economies to get them to compete globally and be almost at the same level with what's happening across the world. So digital finance being the lifeblood, we need to put more investment there. And when I talk about investment, I mean research and also getting access to all at the bottom of the pyramid. So it's going to take investments to cut across emerging markets and getting digital finance included with a big portion of it being at the bottom of the pyramid that are currently excluded, and IMF can play a big role in that.
With that, because the cafeteria is going to open in 5 minutes and it's going to be very noisy then, I suggest that we give our panel members a huge big round of applause and thank them for their participation. Thank you. Great job.
And also to you. And